name is Samantha, and I am the Communications and Marketing Officer here with the BC Co-operative Association. It's great to have everyone here to join us. So I'm just going to start off with just running through a couple housekeeping rules before I pass it on to Andrea to start off the introductions. And Daniel then afterwards will be carrying on the presentation. So in case this is anyone's first time using Zoom, welcome to the program. You may notice that upon entry, most people were automatically set to mute. We do ask that you keep your microphone on mute just to prevent any sort of feedback or echoing issues, just so everyone will have a more enjoyable experience. If you'd like to, you can turn on your cameras as well, but if you would rather not, no worries about that. Just a couple notes. So this session is being recorded, so you can refer to this afterwards once we post it. And also, Daniel will be going through a presentation, and we will be sharing those slides afterwards. So don't worry about having to screenshot everything. That will be passed out to everyone. Also, we do ask if you have any questions during this session to please type them into the chat. We will go through them afterwards. So if you see on the bottom to the right of the green button in the middle, it says chat. Just click on that, and then you can type in your questions into the chat box that appears. And so I think that's sort of about it for me for general housekeeping. So I will pass it off to Andrea, our Executive Director.
Thanks, Sam, and thank you all for attending. This is our third digital meetup, and we really wanted this as a place to share relevant information with our members and other co-ops and credit unions. But more importantly, to also create a space where our members can connect and learn from each other through these interesting and often difficult times. So really encourage you to ask questions and then also connect with each other and share your own stories. We're really happy to have Daniel Brunette here today. He's the Director of Advocacy and Partnerships with Co-ops and Mutuals Canada, our, I guess, parent organization away in terms of nationally representing cooperatives across the country. In his role, he's responsible for providing strategic advocacy and policy advice that's aligned with the framework of the strategic plan of CMC. And so we're really happy to have him here today to share an overview of some of the programs and offerings in response to the crisis from the federal government, which I know we're all really keen to learn more about and understand how they apply to co-ops. So Dan, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Andrea. And you'll see the slides that I'm going to put up is actually, I'm only going to go through the first half. The second half is really for post meetup reading because it's going to focus mostly on the individuals and the resources for those in need and so on. So we're really, with the 20 minutes we have, going to focus on the measures for businesses. But I did want to put a little note out there that there are things being announced daily. So it is very important to not take this as the be all and end all, and to actually use it as a reference and review the links on a regular basis. So without further ado, I would also like to mention that we do have Jen Anthony on the phone with us, who's with the Fleischman Hillard High Road, is a government relations firm that works with us. And we also have Maggie from Real Life Strategies, who's a board member of CMC. So I don't know everybody else on the call yet, but I'm looking forward to meeting you all. All right. All right, well, we're not going to spend too much time here because it's a general slide deck. I do have to put the little disclaimer, so I am not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant. If you have some very technical questions, you can send them to me after follow up via email, and I can then either pass it on to ISED if it's a specific scenario, or help understand what's been discussed either on the business stakeholder calls or in other situations. So basically, just quickly, CMC's role is really to make sure that co-ops are eligible. We share any issues and stories with the government. We make sure that what comes out that impacts co-ops is communicated. So hopefully you're seeing it in our social media and so on. And then we also offer member and sector support. So when there's questions or interpretations, we can play a role in that as well. So most of you are very familiar with COVID-19 responses so far, the restrictions, the gatherings, and so on. It is important that there are a lot of exceptions you need to be aware of, mostly related to supply management and the supply chain. So trucking and so on. There is some activities around temporary foreign workers for the agricultural world to make sure that the crops did not go to waste. Early on, not as much now as the economy is starting to reopen, but there was a lot of questions around what constitutes an essential service. There is not a pan-Canadian rule for that or guidance. It's really at the provincial and territorial level. So you need to know what's going on in BC and what those agreements are. But there's also, we got a lot of questions around the Emergencies Act at the federal level. That used to be the prior iteration was the War Measures Act, where the federal government sort of takes control of everything. That has not been declared, but if you're interested in knowing what the health response is at the Canadian level, the hyperlink is there. Now, just as an FYI, and this is basically aligns with what the provinces and territories have done, this is what the Government of Canada declares as being the critical infrastructure sectors. So you're talking about energy and finance, health, food, and so on. Again, you don't need to write all of this down because the presentation will be made available after. However, you know, as you can imagine, and as you know, co-ops are found in just about every one of those situations or sectors. So one of the big things was around, you know, eligibility overall. I must say ISED's been extremely open and willing to help make sure that co-op messages and questions are answered quickly. For example, when the initial 10% subsidy came out, it was made very clear that it was for Canadian-controlled private corporations, which just from an accounting point of view, co-ops are not. They only fall within the CCPC definitions for the purposes of the small business deduction. So that's something where in the span of, I would say 2, maybe 3 days, it was identified, flagged to ISED, and when you go into documents now, it actually says brackets, including cooperative businesses, which may seem like a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it's one of the few times that co-ops are specifically included in government documents. So that's something, is a trend we hope will keep going. Now, everything is really built in terms of, you know, individuals and businesses. So one of the big ones is the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. That's the 75% addition. There was a lot of discussions around the criteria for it. Most of the business supports and measures are really focused on the small and medium businesses, and many are just on the small businesses. I'm not going to go through this line by line. There's already a lot of text, and I abhor a death by PowerPoint. But that's really just the highlights, so you can see what they, you know, what they actually are. The big point about this is that there is a tool you can go on. There's a calculator that can actually help you understand where you fit and what you can qualify. But the flexibility aspect is what's really important. So whether you're counting accrual basis or you're on a cash basis type of budget, whether you're needing to compare, you know, the returns for this time last year or the prior months, there's a lot of flexibility. Again, we don't have time to go through all the details today, but just know that if you click on the link, all the details and information are there. There are many variations to everything. And one thing that's important is that the government is very focused and wants to be aware of any disconnects or scenarios where they've tried to make all-encompassing programs and measures, but, you know, there's so many different ways that you know, companies, businesses, enterprises can be structured. And I'm not just referring to co-ops, but just how people get paid in general, that this is actually, you know, meant to be an overarching measure without actually being detrimental to those that might be startups and not have the history of financing and budget and so on. Other things around avoiding layoffs and rehiring employees, which was a big pushback. So there was over 1 million requests for EI, you know, early on in the program. So they realized that it had to be more than just a 10% subsidy. They changed the program around work sharing. So that's when a few staff members together decide to work less hours and split the work amongst each other. It's an agreement with the government, but what they've done is actually they've removed the need to have a break between the two work sharing agreements, and also extended the length of time that the program can be in place. And then the 10% wage subsidy. Obviously, most people are interested in the 75% wage subsidy, most businesses. However, if for whatever reason they don't qualify, they may actually be able to qualify under the 10% wage subsidy, which was the first one that was announced. Now, you cannot combine both. It cannot be a 85% wage subsidy, but it is something you should be aware of. A lot of the programs are focused on providing capital, providing liquidity. We're not going to go into all the details. What I really want to flag here is that, and it's in big bold red, so hopefully I've made the point in the slides as well, is the BDC and EDC might have the money, but they're really the conduit. The local financial institutions, so the credit unions, the banks, the Crocodiles, are the ones that actually need to register and work through the BDC and EDC, unless there's some sort of pre-existing, agreement of direct, interaction. But really, if you call the BDC, you'll be on the line for 3 or 4 hours waiting for an answer, and then they're going to say, "Sorry, we can't help you. Talk to your credit union." So that's really something that you and your members need to be aware of. The Business Credit Availability Program is basically loans. The Canada Emergency Business Account is basically an interest-free loan of up to $40,000 for SMEs and nonprofits. One of the things that should be more identified here is the fact that if you looked at this a few weeks ago, the range that made you eligible was quite different. So they actually dropped it to $20,000 in payroll and upped it to 1.5 as part of the range. So again, if somebody said they don't qualify, invite them to go back and look at the scenarios and the criteria again. In terms of the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance, that is something that was announced recently, still being rolled out and still being massaged, if I can say. It's really meant to be, allow small businesses to keep their doors open, or at least notionally keep the space they're in without being evicted if they can't pay the rent. The big challenge, so you're aware, is that the federal government has limited enforcement abilities in regards to rents and agreements and so on, which is at the provincial and territorial level. So how they've been able to structure it is that the property owner is actually the lead, that the entity that needs to actually have the rent agreements and the rent forgiveness agreements before everything can trickle down to the small business. And the challenge is not necessarily with the structure of the program, but it seems that there's a lot of the property owners that they're not lining up to take advantage of this, which the ripple effect means that the small business tenants are not able to access the rent subsidy. So it's basically it's not a rent subsidy for the small business in terms of direct assistance. What it is actually the property owner agrees to significantly slash the rent cost, but that reduction will be offset by money coming in from the feds. So at the end of the day, they should only lose about 1 week's worth of rent for every month period. Now there's other things as well. So there's specific programs for rural businesses and communities, mostly through the RDAs. Innovative and early stage businesses, that's really startups which were unable to actually tap into some money. So there's some money there through IRAP and the National Research Council. Futurepreneur, which, as you know, or hopefully you remember, was recently opened up to co-op entrepreneurs, got some funding to actually help do payment deferrals. So it just means that the young entrepreneurs that are starting off don't have to worry about making their payments back to Futurepreneur Canada right now. So that's something that's of interest. We're hoping that Futurepreneur will get more involved with co-ops as things go, but at least the pipeline was started before COVID hit. If you're involved in northern communities, there's a lot of BC and Yukon connections, especially in the not-for-profit world. There's a relief fund to help businesses connect that way. And if with all the support for businesses that were announced, co-ops are not, the business is unable to fit into one of the designated categories or multiple, there's a $675 million sort of a more discretionary fund. Obviously, it has to fall within the priorities of the RDAs, but the RDAs have been given a mandate to help support the businesses that are doing good work but need help, but don't meet the other measures. So that's something that a lot of the co-ops I spoke to that didn't necessarily fit in the other criterias, they were unaware of this fund or these dollars through the RDAs. So I encourage you to look at them. But really, it comes down to communicating with the RDA itself and seeing what's available. Lots of questions, a lot of issues around youth employment, what's going on with the Canada Summer Jobs Program, what's going on with the work placement programs and the strategies and so on. So really, it boils down to a few things. One, the high demand sectors, so whether you're talking about agriculture or tech and things like that, they've had an influx of money to create positions. They've provided $80 million to help students that are recent grads mostly get work placements in their field. So that doesn't have to be a high demand sector, just in your field. If you're involved with a university, the MyTax program and the Higher Education Roundtable are things you're familiar with. There's money on the table for 5,000 more student-related sort of research positions and academic positions. So if you're looking to do research, this might be a good way to tap into that as well. Plus other funding that's going to be redirected. And in terms of the Canada Summer Jobs, you have to have gone through the process and have requested the student position already. But assuming that's going to roll out as it's planned, it's actually going to provide up to 100% of the minimum wage in that province. There's money as well for Indigenous businesses. So, small, medium Indigenous businesses, though, they know who they are. They're involved with NACA and Aboriginal financial institutions already, probably. So there's some money on the table for that. But the last point is in terms of the online tools to find business support. So that's actually a hyperlink. If you click on there, you can actually go and punch in your, what you're looking for in terms of support. And it's a smart table. It'll actually, at the end of the day, spit out what you're eligible for as part of the measures. As you know, if you compare it, it's very similar to when you're in college or university and you want to know what scholarships are out there. You put in who you are and what program you're in, and the magic of the technology spits out the list of things you can qualify for. This is the exact same thing. Now, one of the things that we've addressed, and we've raised it already, is that often programs at the federal level are clear-cut between for-profit and not-for-profit. And as we all know, there's no such thing as profit in the co-op world. There's just revenue over expenses. So to align with what's being done in terms of StatsCan data, and from a clear way to explain it to employees and program officers, if the co-op is giving dividends and paying taxes, it falls into the for-profit category. If they have not-for-profit status because of the Form 1044, or they don't pay dividends or taxes, then they're a nonprofit. So it's not as clear-cut in the real world, but that's a very easy way to look at it. And when you have to fill out forms like the online tool, it's one or the other. There's no co-op box yet. In terms of other business programs, so I'm not going to go into much details here. So a lot of income tax are deferred. The sales and remittance tax are deferred until June. There's a lot of federal investment in financial stability measures, such as CMHC's mortgage insurance program. The Bank of Canada is obviously lowering rates or doing market interventions. And the Superintendent of Financial Services has lowered the domestic stability buffer, which I did not know existed until all this COVID stuff happened. But really, it's part of the risk calculation in terms of financial management. So those, if you're really keen on financial side of things, I encourage you to go in and see those. But really, at the end of the day, from an operational day-to-day point of view, it's unlikely that you'll be involved or need to go into the financial stability measures information. Now, one thing that's very important as well is that they've actually focused and they have some resources specific for different sectors. So, for example, I'm not going to list, I didn't list it here, but there's a recent announcement of 252 million, mostly to help products and produce not go to waste and also get processed. So one of the big issues was that the processing plants where they're doing pork and chickens and stuff like that, they've had to out of pocket spend a lot of money to outfit their staff with personal protective equipment. A lot of the milk that was being produced, I don't know for BC, but certainly in Ontario and Quebec, it's been a huge issue of milk going to waste. So there's about 50 million that's been put on the table to just basically buy those items, like buy that milk, buy that cheese, and put it in the hands of food banks. So again, if you're involved with food banks or food distribution networks, that's a good point. Things around cultural heritage and sports. So that's something that obviously if people aren't going to any shows these days, so a lot of charities and nonprofits are being hit that way. There's there's fees waived for air transportation and money to help get food and keep air transportation going up north. Impact on tourism, energy, especially if you look at Alberta, they put a lot of money to keep people employed by cleaning up old oil wells and things like that. And obviously there's measures for nonprofit and charitable. So there's a little bit something for everyone, but it might not answer everyone's needs. On the other side, there's specific information for the industry. So if you're involved in any type of food preparation, the Food Inspection Agency has some guidances, fisheries and oceans and so on. The second point on the right-hand column is the call to action. So if you or any of the co-ops in your network are involved or could redirect their activities around COVID-19. So there's a 1,200 person sewing co-op in Montreal that switched from making the other things they were doing into making masks and gowns for hospitals. Those are the things that the feds are really looking for and have money. So it's a good way to keep the co-op in operation as well if you can repurpose and make hand sanitizer rather than spirits or something like a few of the businesses are doing out east. So that's still a call to action, and I think personally, I think it's also a way for the government to know who can repurpose, so they can be better prepared if there's a future pandemic and so on, and of course everything around transport. So in terms of recommended next steps, because we're already coming up to close to the 20 minutes, the point one is review the programs and go back often. So that hyperlink there brings you to Canada's Economic Response Plan for COVID-19, lots of information. But again, if you use that tool, it should the business support tool, it'll save you a lot of time because you can find exactly what you're looking for. So CMC has a web page that has a lot of links and information to the members. It also has a lot of, law firms will sometimes be doing something specific. HR consultancies put stuff up. There's a lot of information out there which you should be able to find. I invite you to use CMC's web page, look at the information of BCCA. The CMC regularly posts things on their Facebook that can impact co-ops or just businesses in general, including co-ops. So you can look at there. If there's questions of the financial nature, speak to your credit union, your Caisse Populaire, or the bank if need be. But the Van City was one of the first to cut their some of their rates. So there's a lot of good things going on, but in terms of the loans and so on, it's really a financial question. Don't talk to EDC or BDC; they won't be able to help you. The repurposing of masks I mentioned. The link there brings you to the application form. Really, if you have any good stories or things that you're very proud of in your co-op in terms of COVID-19 response, share it with us. We've been asked by ISED to share any good stories, and we can bring it forward. If you have any questions, or specifically, if you are told by a member of the Regional Development Agency staff, or you're having trouble connecting with CRA, there are no programs that are specific to businesses that co-ops are not eligible for. That's what I've been told. but that, the difference between intent and on the ground frontline staff understanding is not always the case, is not always the same. So if you're having any issues whatsoever accessing programs and you meet the criteria, do let me know. And then we just sent, with Andrea's signature as well, a letter to the federal government, to all parliamentarians, coming from the provincial network of, the network of provincial and territorial associations and CMC, and also signed by Canada's emerging cooperators, encouraging the government to include co-ops as part of the plan for the economic recovery post-COVID-19. So you're going to see more coming out next week. We invite you to help build a more cooperative economy post-COVID-19 by just sending one of those support letters. Templates will be provided and so on. And then I have my name and all my contact information right there. The following slides I'm not going to go through because it's self-explanatory. It's just other information and a bunch of links. A few things I wanted to mention though, just context-wise. So Canada's at 63,496 cases so far and 4,043 deaths. So the risk is still very high. 2,255 of the cases are in BC, which you might be aware of, but it is something where social distancing is still very important. The priorities that that are currently sort of being discussed and worked down. So obviously, the COVID-19 situation in long-term care houses is really top of mind right now. The government has just announced that they're removing tariffs on personal protective equipment, so that should make it more affordable. They've also just announced a $4 billion agreement with the provinces to help boost wages for essential workers, usually those around the minimum wage or close to it. So it's very important that those people that are in the front line but might be underpaid are actually given a boost. And it's likely going to be linked to the provincial minimum wage in terms of what that translates as. But again, one of the big things is they're asking for disconnects. So if any of the programs, your co-op is not eligible for, or the structure you have doesn't work, let us know. CRA does have about 2,000 staff dedicated solely to COVID-19 questions. It still takes about I would say at least 2 hours to get somebody on the phone if you have questions, but that is where you should go for very technical questions. If you're expecting a payment or if you filled out a form, the average processing is about 22 days. So it's not something where you're going to get checked the next day. However, if you have a My Business account and you have changed or your contact information has changed and you forgot to update it, they're finding that they're having to make calls to people that have changed your information, and then those calls are being perceived as spam, because when you get a call from somebody at CRA saying, I have money for you, it usually sounds like a spam, because we've been warned for years now to not do that. There's still a bunch of questions around and things, what happens if a business closes and goes into receivership? Will they have to pay back the money and so on? Also, there's some provinces that encourage staggering approach, having workers come in for 2 weeks and then stepping off for 2 weeks, and by having other staff come in. And the issue with that is that is not harmonized with how the federal program is for wage subsidy. So that's creating an issue at certain points. But being conscious of time, I'm going to wrap it up just by saying that BC released its economic sort of reopening yesterday, actually. So some health services, retail, restaurants, salons and museums will be reopening. Hotels, resorts, and parks will be in June. But until further notice, there's no conventions, there's no large concerts, there's no international tourism, and anything that's professional sports with an audience is to be done without an audience, at least until there's a vaccine, community immunity, or a more workable treatment. So I think I'm 20 minutes on the dot, so I'm gonna be I guess closing this and going to the FaceTime. All right.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That was so much information, and I'm sure everyone's going to find that extremely useful. I'm actually just going to submit to the chat right now, so it'll just be a link to the slides that Danielle is just sharing. And also, while people are maybe looking through that, I see that there were a couple questions that were put into the chat. We'll just go through those ones first, and then we can just open it up. So then if it is, if someone wants to have a question afterwards, just pop that into the chat, or if you're on video, raise your hand, and then we'll get to you. So the first one here, we have it from Andrea. So Andrea, do you want to read out your question?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sorry, guys, on mute there. I'm just wondering, I had quite a few questions for you, Dan, but just thinking about some of our members who actually lease from in municipal buildings. I'm wondering if you know anything about that, and would that rent program apply in that instance?
So the for SECRA, a lot of details are still forthcoming, but I can tell you just, and I don't know this by heart, I'll freely admit that I'm on the CMHC website on a laptop next to me right now. But in order to be able to qualify, so the property owner needs to generate revenue from a commercial property in Canada. That makes sense. The owner has to be impacted by the small business tenants, which obviously makes sense. There has to be a mortgage loan secured by the commercial real property. However, there's a little asterisk saying that there's an alternative mechanism coming for those. There has to be a rent reduction agreement, which is what I referenced earlier in regards to rent forgiveness. So there's nothing that specifically excludes municipal buildings. Sorry, actually the next one is actually the applicable commercial property owners can, as long as they have small business tenants, subtenants, or residential components and multi-unit residential properties. So there's nothing excluding it, but I can ask the question certainly and get back to you. But at the end of the day, it's meant to be the small business. So if the co-op is the business owner, or if the municipality is the business owner, then the property owner, there shouldn't be, I guess, issues. However, a lot of the relief measures were not available for public bodies. So I will follow up, but it's I'm going to leave it open, as I don't have a clear answer for you right now, apart from what I listed.
Okay. I think my second question, Sandra, you answered it in part for me, so thank you for that. Just wanting to understand, is WDED the only RDA applicable in BC?
Yes.
And so that's yes. And just wanting, Dan, do you have any, because I was just on their website and they're talking about a regional relief and recovery fund. Do you have any insight around that and what that might cover?
No, not anything more than the quick references on the website. It's really one of the issues with RDAs is they're not necessarily known to they have each regional development agency has its own priorities usually, so they're very focused on moving forward, whether it's diversification of the economy or things like that, or young innovators. It varies considerably. So in this case, though, the government has given them a significant amount of money to implement programs. So they're still working out what that looks like and what the needs are on the ground. So I would say the Relief and Recovery Fund is likely going to be around, many of the essential services that the province has identified and so on. But I really don't have much on that right now. I apologize. I'm mostly focused on the federal level.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh,
okay. The wage boost for minimum workers, I I can. It was actually just announced today, so the program hasn't actually been rolled out. It's just a statement. So sorry, it was fresh as of the Prime Minister's speech this morning. So I don't have all the details yet. However, expect it'll be coming out quite quickly. Because the main announcement was that there was an agreement, so now they can proceed in developing the criteria and so on.
Yeah, Andrea, it's Jen. Maybe one thing to add on that is that one rolls out with money from the federal government to the provinces and territories. And then the provinces and territories are responsible for deciding what are the eligibility criteria. So we'll need to watch BC specific announcement on that, not now that the money's available. And it's $4 billion from the federal government, which is across the country, and that constitutes 3/4 of the total amount. So the total amount will be somewhere in the range of just over 5 billion. And so BC's share of that is whatever proportional amount that is. So it's not totally clear whether or not that'll apply to just minimum wage workers. The Prime Minister basically said the principle is that if you're considered essential during this time and to keep things moving and you make minimum wage, you deserve to get a raise. So that doesn't preclude people getting higher, like people who make slightly more than minimum wage getting a raise, or people in certain sectors just getting a raise. But it's really up to BC to decide how they roll out the BC program at this point. And so there has not been, and the key point here is that they have not yet said anything today, but it could come at any time. But most of these agreements have been signed. A couple of the provinces were still working out details this morning.
Okay. Well, that'll be something to watch for, I think, for our members in the grocery sector and in healthcare. So we have a few co-ops across the province who I think could really benefit from that. Yeah. Sandy, in your response to me, you had mentioned that you were trying to connect with WED to get more information about their program. Have you applied or have you supported some of your co-ops in your area to apply for any other programs? And what's your experience been like, if you have?
The constant, I email them like every week or so to see what's up. I was discussing a particular proposal idea, and they said they're interested in it, but they'd get back, and they haven't gotten back. So I have a sense that they just haven't gotten themselves organized yet. That's what I think at this point. They're really focused on economic well, the focus is supposed to be on rural development and so on, which would fit really nicely. And there's a huge need for rural development, but they require a lot of stuff that you have to be pretty sophisticated to be able to manage. So anyway, we'll see if there's extra load of money, we'll do them any good. The same with Community Futures is getting another load of money. And it's hard to say whether it's going to go all into loans or if it's going to go into programs or anything. So the Community Futures BC has got a program with 2 or 3 Community Futures get together. They can get a pretty good grant. And so I'm looking at that as a possibility because we are working in 2 or 3 areas with our meat strategies. So we're considering whether we can take advantage of that opportunity. But I'm finding that a lot of them so far, the criteria and the timing and everything else, like the last time I talked to her, she said, well, we're 50%, we'll give you 50%. Well, if you're a rural area, where are you going to get the 50%, So anyway, if I hear anything, I'll let you know, and if anything happens at all. But I mean, they've been given a big whack of money. They should be dishing something out pretty soon.
And just to build on Sandy's point, there's the money earmarked for rural businesses, but there's also that 675 million across the 6 RDAs for things that don't fit the usual, the other measures, right? So if the rural one is not outlined yet, the other one I think will take a bit longer even to iron out what the criteria will be for that.
Yeah.
I'd be curious from anybody else on the line what their experiences have been if they've applied, if they're representing co-ops, if they've applied for any of these programs, and yeah, what it's been like for them.
I might just say that whenever I see a program that will fit anybody in our area, I let them know, but either they're too busy to apply, they don't understand what is needed. I know that various people are helping people apply. I think Community Futures is trying to help people with that. But a lot of these things are good programs, but if you aren't sort of a proposal hound, you know, it's it always is difficult to figure out how to get through some of the gates on that. So, I mean, I think they've done a good job of making things pretty easy, but the rollout is a challenge. And if you're not sophisticated, or even, if you've never really done any of these things before, you kind of get a bit worried as if you're doing it right or wrong or anything like that.
One of the, oh, sorry, if I can just, it ties into the second part of the slides that is for your reference only. But the relief that's given to individuals in terms of working or not, or who can't work because of COVID or self-isolation and so on, that's actually one of the I guess understated points. Is there's a lot of students, a lot of part-time individuals that are faced with the question of, on their side, does it make more sense to stay home or go to work, and what are the risks there? The employers are asking the same question. So it's very, very important that there be if possible, open and frank conversation of what's best for the employees, what's best for the staff. You don't want to send the business into bankruptcy trying to keep staff paid. So it requires some HR conversations. There's tie-ins to EI and health insurance and so on. So it depends what programs are available to work. So it's meant to be simple, but it can also get complicated very fast. So it is something where those involved, on HR or finances need to, step back and crunch some numbers in many cases.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Dan. And then there's the reality, right? Like, so many of our co-op members are really small. So they could be worker co-ops with only 3 or 4 or 5 people, volunteer boards, and how do you bridge that capacity gap to even get through the door, right? To even be able to find the bandwidth to fill out an application and pull together the data and information you need. So I think it's tough. I mean, I know, speaking to some of our members, that is spot on, Sandy. That's a big barrier. If you're running in a million directions just trying to survive, how do you even stop and take a breath, learn what programs apply to you, and then find the time to apply, which I'm sure is not insignificant. So maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's something there that we could be exploring as an association in terms of trying to perhaps, I don't know, think creatively around how we can support each other through that.
For example, that $40,000 loan is a lovely loan because it's no interest, and then $10K is free if you pay it back in a certain period of time. Very nice, but you have to have a certain amount of money, and you have to have these different criteria. Personally, in my business, my personal consulting business, I couldn't get it, even though I sure as hell could use it, because I didn't have the right kind of bank account. So they get you one way or the other. So you really have to pay attention, and I've suggested that a couple of the businesses in our area look at that 10% program, because they could all use it. So I don't know, it might be useful to have a workshop with people who are trying to figure these things out. I'm not sure if that would be useful, but I know that it is a problem, and some people who could use it are just kind of shaking their heads.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sam.
Oh no, I was gonna say, like, thank you so much to Sandy for like that extra insight, because for sure it's definitely one of the things that we've heard. So, for example, one of our members who are in the Golden Community Social Services Co-op, sort of in response to that thing where they are hearing from their community that people were aware that there are a lot of resources, but weren't quite sure if they need more information, where to go, or how to help, getting some help with filling out those application forms. So they hired on a new staff member who's specializing in just helping people go through that process of applying for these programs. So yeah, it's definitely something, perhaps we'll look into seeing where we can better support other people, seeing if there's perhaps other co-ops or other organizations who have staff on hand to help people, and other co-ops and credit unions and all their members, if it is that they need help with going through that application process.
Any other questions or comments from other participants on the call or the meetup that before we wrap up?
One thing that I just want to add that's been brought up is it's one of the programs right now, as they've been outlined. It's one of the few times where having a diversified business can actually be negative. So some of the larger co-ops that might be involved in fuel and retail and oil and all that stuff, they've seen a massive drop in one business line, like tourism, for example. But because it's consolidated revenue, they don't meet the 30% drop, right? So it's unfortunate, but it's a reality of trying to have one program. But again, the intent is to serve as many as possible. So that's why it's important to flag any sort of discrepancies or situations where you feel it should qualify and the intent is there, but it's not. It might just not fit neatly into that box at the moment.
Any other questions while we still have Dan on the line? Anyone else? Feel free to unmute yourself and just shout out any questions you may have. Sounds like it's quiet, so I think probably there's a lot of information for everyone just to sort of digest and think through, read through and everything. So if that's sort of it for now, we always want to thank everyone for participating in this call. As I said earlier in the beginning, we have recorded this session, so after when we have it uploaded, we can send out the link for everyone to view and sort of review, go over the content. I did post the link to the slides inside the chat, but we will also be pushing out that link as well on our social media platforms. So if you lose that one, don't worry, the link will be coming back up. Just sort of wrap things up, a big thank you to Danielle for joining us today. We know it's a little bit later for you since you are over in Ottawa. So thank you for sharing your information. We hope everyone here learned a lot and had some of their questions answered. And, like Danielle was saying in the slides, feel free at any time if you have any questions, something you think about later, do reach out to us at BCCA or CMC. And so we're always happy to help you however we can. If we can't answer your questions, we will connect you to other resources or our partners who will give you better information. Our next co-op meetup will be on May 28th. And that will be focusing on sort of your co-op strategy and how to stay relevant to your members. We will also be putting this out on social media and through our newsletter. So, save that date in your calendars, and then more details will be coming through soon. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone for joining us today.